Introduction: Why I wrote this book and how to use it. The narrative begins on a summer evening in late June of 1975 at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. At the time, the narrator served as a rookie police officer in this generally secure and idyllic collegiate environment. A 15-year-old girl named Susan Curtis, attending a youth conference on the campus, vanished without a trace. Tasked with the initial investigation into her sudden disappearance, the young officer probed her family and friends, desperately searching for any fragment of a lead. Despite a few verifiable steps, such as a used meal ticket that proved she had been active earlier in the day, the clues rapidly ran cold. Upon examining her dormitory room, the dry bristles of her toothbrush stood as a silent, haunting testament that she had never returned to prepare for the night. The profound agony and fathomless desperation of her family left an indelible mark on the officer. Days turned into years, and the case remained an open, aching wound. The officer kept a copy of the investigative file, complete with her photograph, and perpetually scanned faces in crowds for any resemblance, forever haunted by a profound sense of failing to protect an innocent soul. Years later, after the officer had transitioned into a career as a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a startling call from a Salt Lake City investigator finally brought a grim closure to the mystery. The perpetrator was a seemingly charming young man who had been prowling the campus in a Volkswagen on that fateful night. His name was Theodore Bundy, an apex predator who would eventually admit to claiming the lives of 35 young women across multiple states. Looking back, the narrator realized he might have crossed paths with the killer's vehicle during his campus patrol. It was an ordinary evening, devoid of any visible criminal activity, yet a dangerous personality had been actively hunting among them. That chilling realization that a single individual could unleash so much devastation upon victims and their families was a defining moment. It crystallized the understanding that absolute safety is an illusion when dangerous individuals walk freely in our world. This traumatic event forged a lifelong dedication within the narrator. It propelled him to join the FBI's elite behavioral analysis programs, driven by an insatiable need to comprehend the minds of those who inflict the most severe harm. Over 4 decades of investigating and interviewing criminals and their victims, a stark truth emerged. Specific personality types are consistently responsible for an overwhelming majority of human suffering. We have grown tragically accustomed to the horrific headlines of mass shootings in schools, workplaces, and public gatherings. In the aftermath of these atrocities, society collectively grapples with the question of how such violence could occur and whether it could have been prevented. These highly publicized events, occurring with metronomic frequency, paralyze our collective consciousness and dominate the cultural conversation for months. Yet, as devastating as these massacres are, they obscure a much more pervasive and insidious reality. For every highly publicized tragedy, there are countless unseen atrocities occurring daily. The true peril lies in the shadows, within our homes, places of worship, offices, and schools. These dangerous individuals operate under the radar, dismantling lives one victim at a time through domestic violence, sexual assault, financial ruin, and emotional abuse. The scale of this silent epidemic is staggering, encompassing millions of assaults, burglaries, and robberies annually. Often, these perpetrators evade justice entirely. Criminological data suggests that a mere fraction of these wrongdoers ever face incarceration. This means the vast majority of those capable of causing us immense physical, psychological, and financial harm remain free to exploit the unsuspecting, persisting for years or even decades before their destructive paths are halted. Throughout a career dedicated to profiling and investigating, a distinct pattern began to materialize. A recurring cast of character types dominated the landscape of criminality and interpersonal destruction. These individuals were perpetually deceitful, deeply manipulative, and derived profound satisfaction from exploiting others, exhibiting a blatant disregard for societal rules or basic human empathy. One striking example from the mid-1990s involved a young, remarkably pleasant woman who consistently welcomed investigators into her home with warm hospitality and sweet tea. For nearly a year, she actively fed federal agents information regarding a Soviet bloc spy. However, her enthusiastic cooperation was an elaborate facade. It was eventually uncovered that she was the very espionage agent they sought, having sold highly classified documents and placing entire nations at risk during the Cold War. Her pleasant demeanor masked a profound character flaw, demonstrating how dangerous personalities can disguise themselves with charm and charisma. Over time, it became evident that the vast majority of this suffering stems from 4 specific personality profiles: the narcissistic personality, the emotionally unstable personality, the paranoid personality, and the predator. These individuals are burdened by severe deficits in both personality and moral character, consistently leaving a wake of human devastation in their paths. The primary ambition of this work is to equip the public with the crucial knowledge required to identify and avoid these destructive figures. They are deeply embedded in our daily lives. They could be neighbors, colleagues, romantic partners, family members, or community leaders entrusted with our well-being. Malice rarely announces its arrival with fanfare. Often, perpetrators hide in plain sight, maintaining ordinary lives and holding respectable positions while secretly orchestrating horrific acts. Consider the notorious serial killers who served as municipal employees and church leaders, maintaining a secret life of torture and murder for decades, or the high-profile coaches who used their venerated status to abuse children. Society conditions us to avoid prying into the affairs of others, fostering a pervasive social blindness. When victimization occurs, the aftermath is inevitably filled with the agonized question of how the warning signs were missed. Hindsight illuminates what our uneducated foresight could not grasp. By highlighting the behavioral cues and personality traits that signal danger, this analysis aims to empower individuals. We cannot outsource our personal safety to overburdened police departments, swamped mental health clinics, or an imperfect judicial system. It is our individual responsibility to develop the necessary awareness to assess the character of those we allow into our lives, safeguarding our emotional, financial, and physical security. In constructing this framework, a deliberate choice was made to employ terminology that is immediately accessible, avoiding clinical jargon that might obscure the core message across different cultures. For instance, rather than utilizing heavily debated clinical terms like psychopath or antisocial personality disorder, which require rigorous specialized diagnostic criteria that even professionals debate, the term predator is used. It perfectly encapsulates the nature of individuals who exploit others without remorse or regard for boundaries. Similarly, the label emotionally unstable is utilized instead of complex psychiatric diagnoses like borderline or histrionic personality disorders, which often carry stigmatizing connotations and provide little clarity for the layperson. Conversely, terms such as narcissistic and paranoid are retained, as their extensive history in cultural, mythological, and literary traditions makes their fundamental meanings widely understood by the general public. In high-stakes law enforcement situations, such as hostage negotiations, there is no luxury of time for lengthy psychological evaluations. Decisions must be made instantaneously. Over years of confronting intense crises within the Bureau, vital insights regarding the behavioral patterns of these individuals were distilled into practical, real-time assessment tools. This closely guarded knowledge is now presented in the form of detailed checklists. Rather than relying on statistical probabilities, which can create a false sense of security and lead to dangerous complacency, these tools focus entirely on observable behaviors. They are intentionally comprehensive and highly specific, capturing the subtle, nuanced actions that distinguish a mere annoyance from a profound threat. These frameworks are designed to illuminate the most common behavioral traits that signal caution, uncover actions that may appear normal but inherently communicate peril, help anticipate future transgressions, and accurately gauge the potential threat level directed at those within the individual's sphere. By evaluating where an individual falls on a spectrum from mild to severe, one can accurately anticipate future behavior and gauge the level of risk they present. It is crucial to recognize the scope and limitations of this text. It is not intended to serve as a manual for clinical diagnosis, a task strictly reserved for extensively trained mental health professionals operating within established medical criteria. Instead, it functions as a practical, descriptive tool for the everyday individual seeking to navigate interpersonal relationships safely. While clinical literature often delves into the underlying causes of such disorders, this work maintains a singular focus on observable behavior and self-preservation. When faced with someone who consistently inflicts harm or drains one's resources, the etiology of their condition is secondary to the immediate need for protection. Understanding an individual's behavioral trajectory, the principle that past behavior is the most reliable predictor of future actions, is the most potent weapon in avoiding victimization. Knowing how an individual is wired dictates the probable outcome of any interaction with them. The fundamental philosophy underpinning this work is the belief that while all individuals deserve basic human respect, no one bears a societal obligation to endure victimization. The objective is not to instill fear, but to cultivate a refined safety radar, an intuitive capacity to detect warning signs and establish necessary boundaries. By individually raising our awareness and refusing to tolerate exploitative behavior, we collectively diminish the space in which these dangerous personalities can operate, ultimately containing the havoc they wreak long before they find their way into the headlines. If this knowledge prevents even one person from being physically, emotionally, or financially destroyed, its ultimate purpose has been fulfilled. Chapter 1. It's all about me. The narcissistic personality. The label narcissist is frequently tossed around in casual conversation, yet its true meaning remains deeply misunderstood by the general public. While its origins trace back to the ancient Greek myth of Narcissus, the tragic figure who fell hopelessly in love with his own reflection, the modern application of the term often merely scratches the surface. People typically picture a mildly vain individual, perhaps someone who names buildings after themselves or constantly seeks the glare of reality television cameras. It is true that a desire for the limelight exists, but the type of pathological narcissism discussed here extends far beyond mere self-promotion into behaviors that are profoundly toxic and inherently dangerous. These individuals care exclusively for their own needs, priorities, and desires. Where a healthy person might appreciate a compliment or a moment of recognition, the narcissistic personality hungers for it ceaselessly, manipulating the people and environments around them to ensure a steady supply of attention. While an ordinary person strives to achieve success through hard work and dedication, the narcissist relies on scheming, lying, and bending the truth, entirely indifferent to the collateral damage inflicted upon others. Such personalities infiltrate every stratum of society, from the highest echelons of power, where history documents their role in igniting wars and devastating entire populations, to the ordinary spaces of daily life. They can be found occupying the neighboring office cubicle, sitting at the local bar, participating in community sports, teaching in classrooms, or even holding positions of authority within spiritual congregations. The classic fairy tale of Cinderella, featuring a profoundly cruel stepmother and stepsisters entirely obsessed with their own elevation, serves as a poignant cultural illustration of this exploitative nature. Across history, numerous cultures have produced variations of this narrative, seemingly to warn future generations about the perils of engaging with people who live selfishly at the expense of others. Much like those antagonist figures, real-life narcissists are incapable of perceiving their own flaws, viewing anyone who fails to worship them as insignificant entities worthy only of denigration and torment. Unlike the fairy tale, however, reality offers no magical interventions. Protecting oneself from these individuals requires personal vigilance and informed action. It is crucial to differentiate pathological narcissism from genuine confidence. Authentic confidence is rooted in a strong, admirable character, whereas the apparent confidence of a narcissist is merely a facade for profound arrogance. This character flaw fuels grandiose visions and an unyielding pursuit of personal desires, almost always at a severe cost to others. Grandiose ideas are not inherently negative. Visionary concepts have propelled society forward, from the electrification of the world to lunar landings and the creation of beloved amusement parks designed for universal joy. The narcissist's grandiosity, however, is fundamentally different. It is characterized not by a desire to elevate humanity, but by a demand for supreme adoration and total submission. Historical examples of cult leaders vividly demonstrate this destructive grandiosity, where the ultimate price for admission into their vision is the surrender of free will, life savings, and sometimes life itself. The distinction lies not in the scale of the ideas, but in the severe character flaws of the individual, whose singular goal is absolute personal elevation. From a developmental perspective, all human beings experience a childhood phase characterized by egocentrism and a high sense of entitlement. The tragedy of the narcissistic personality is that they never psychologically outgrow this infantile stage. Their need to remain the absolute center of the universe compels them to engage in behaviors ranging from the absurd to the deeply offensive. They will intentionally arrive late to important gatherings, forcing others to wait, and making their eventual entrance a theatrical spectacle designed solely to draw all eyes upon them. In professional or social settings, they harbor no reservations about declaring themselves the most intelligent or capable person present. They frequently drop the names of prominent individuals to artificially inflate their own social standing. Physical appearance also holds paramount importance, leading to an obsession with mirrors, fitness, or cosmetic enhancements, all utilized as tools to ensure they command the most attention or possess the most expensive accoutrements. Despite presenting an image of vast accomplishment, their actual achievements often fall woefully short. Yet, this discrepancy does not deter them from acting superior or viewing themselves as unrecognized geniuses. When inevitable failures occur, they possess an uncanny ability to deflect all responsibility. The fault invariably lies with a flawed system, an incompetent supervisor, an unappreciative public, or an envious society, never with their own shortcomings. Conversely, when the world fails to treat them with the exceptional reverence they believe is their birthright, their reaction mirrors an infantile tantrum, manifesting as sulking, seething resentment, or even explosive violence. Their nature is inherently vengeful, allowing them to hold lifelong grudges while berating others with absolute impunity. Operating from a baseline of assumed superiority, the narcissistic personality perceives the rest of humanity as either marginally useful or entirely inferior. They are the quintessential bullies of the adult world, having mastered the art of elevating themselves by systematically tearing others down. This dynamic is directly linked to the pervasive rise in severe bullying observed across modern society, as individuals with strong narcissistic traits persistently overvalue their own worth while aggressively devaluing their peers. This toxicity has expanded into the digital realm, where relentless online torment can drive vulnerable individuals to tragic, irreversible outcomes. Narcissists possess a predatory intuition for identifying the insecurities of those around them, weaponizing these vulnerabilities to assert dominance. They might subtly draw attention to their own expensive possessions to diminish someone else's, or loudly criticize the offerings at a social gathering, entirely unconcerned with the host's feelings. Their objective is to thrive on the belittlement of others. Sometimes, this cruelty is masked as false sympathy, delivering a backhanded compliment designed to shatter someone's confidence right before a crucial moment. In more overt displays, they will publicly humiliate their spouses, children, or service workers with caustic indifference, demonstrating a chilling lack of basic human decency. Such public beratement should immediately serve as a glaring warning sign to anyone observing that they are in the presence of a highly dangerous individual. A fundamental consequence of their self-perceived superiority is a near-total absence of empathy. While ordinary individuals develop the capacity to understand and share the feelings of others, the narcissist remains emotionally barren. Personal crises or suffering experienced by others are viewed merely as irritating distractions that draw attention away from the narcissist's own desires. A partner's severe illness or a child's need for care will not deter them from demanding immediate compliance with their own trivial whims. In fact, they interpret the vulnerabilities and needs of others as pathetic weaknesses that only serve to validate their own elevated status. While some blatantly project their haughty arrogance through every word and posture, others are socially cunning enough to feign empathy when it serves a calculated agenda. A seemingly concerned inquiry from a supervisor might merely be a veiled attempt to determine when a worker can return to generating profit. However, during moments of high stress or crisis, their true egocentric nature inevitably breaches the surface. Historical corporate disasters have revealed executives who, in the face of massive environmental devastation and loss of human life, publicly lamented only the personal inconvenience the tragedy caused them. This breathtaking lack of compassion reveals the core truth. They simply do not care about anyone but themselves. The charm they utilize during the initial stages of a relationship or business venture is entirely functional, deployed exclusively to ensnare a target. Once the objective is secured, the attentiveness evaporates, replaced by a cold entitlement. The most perilous narcissists exhibit a reptilian indifference that borders on psychopathy, demonstrating an absolute lack of conscience. They will exploit others emotionally, financially, and physically without a shred of remorse. If a person is useful, they are temporarily tolerated. If they become inconvenient, they are subjected to profound debasement or total destruction. This callousness is the driving force behind shocking acts of unprovoked violence or parental neglect, where the preservation of the narcissist's own pleasure supersedes all moral obligations. Fueled by an unshakable sense of entitlement, narcissistic personalities genuinely believe that the rules governing ordinary society do not apply to them. They feel uniquely exempt from hard work, routinely taking unethical shortcuts to secure their desires. This pervasive mindset explains the frequent downfalls of high-profile political and corporate figures who embezzle funds, engage in scandalous betrayals of trust, or shatter ethical boundaries without a second thought. When confronted with their transgressions, they do not experience guilt. Rather, they react with intense, indignant rage that anyone would dare question their behavior. To feed their insatiable need for recognition, they frequently construct elaborate fictions regarding their personal histories, fabricating prestigious academic degrees, heroic military service, or specialized professional credentials. This behavior crosses the line from mere bragging into profound societal betrayal, especially when they assume roles that require absolute public trust. Their capacity for deception is boundless, allowing them to execute devastating cons that emotionally and financially bankrupt their trusting victims. By nature, they lack any conceptual understanding of interpersonal boundaries. They view other human beings merely as extensions of their own will, existing solely to be manipulated and directed. In intimate encounters, the word "no" is treated not as a boundary, but as a minor obstacle to be ignored or forcefully bypassed. Corporate leaders who knowingly devastate the financial security of thousands of employees to maintain their own lavish lifestyles exemplify this profound lack of boundaries. Similarly, individuals in positions of authority who exploit the vulnerable populations entrusted to their care demonstrate the horrific extreme of narcissistic pathology. When exposed, these perpetrators offer no genuine apologies, for they truly believe they were entitled to commit their heinous acts. The desire for absolute control is another defining pillar of this personality structure. Relationships often begin with the narcissist appearing generous or highly organized, taking charge of shared responsibilities or finances. Over time, however, this dynamic metastasizes into suffocating dominance. A partner may find themselves entirely financially dependent, stripped of all access to joint resources, and forced to beg for basic necessities. The narcissist utilizes control to systematically dismantle the victim's autonomy, leaving them destitute, isolated, and entirely reliant upon their abuser. Naturally drawn to positions of power, these individuals frequently seek careers in law, medicine, politics, or corporate leadership, where their authority can be wielded as an instrument of subjugation rather than service. Their primary motivation in acquiring status is never altruistic. It is always a mechanism to ensure they cannot be challenged or held accountable. Regardless of the scale of their influence, the end result is always the glorification of the narcissist through the total domination and exploitation of those beneath them. When victims and survivors attempt to articulate their experiences with these individuals, the language they employ is visceral and unflinchingly raw. Stripped of clinical terminology, their words reflect deep emotional trauma and profound betrayal. They describe their tormentors as abusive, arrogant, and beguiling actors who operate with a chilling, calculating callousness. They are seen as charismatic chameleons who use their charm to mask a deeply deceitful and destructive core. Victims frequently use words like domineering, egocentric, and exploitative to capture the essence of their daily reality. The narcissist is remembered as an intimidating, irresponsible, and manipulative predator who plays Machiavellian games with human lives. They are labeled as self-centered showmen, toxic tyrants, and unapologetic swindlers who leave behind a legacy of intense, unsympathetic cruelty. This extensive lexicon of pain serves as a powerful warning about the true nature of these deeply flawed human beings. Initially, detecting a narcissist can be exceptionally difficult due to their intelligence, engaging demeanor, and aura of extreme confidence. They are remarkably adept at projecting charm toward anyone they believe can advance their agenda. Eventually, however, the facade cracks, and the underlying arrogance and hostility emerge. Their behavior oscillates between overt displays of haughtiness and a cold, patronizing aloofness that leaves their targets feeling deeply unsettled. They are masters of the subtle emotional strike, intentionally withholding validation for your accomplishments or remaining callously indifferent to your physical or emotional pain. By refusing to offer the slightest comfort or recognition, they deliberately force you into a state of isolated despair. Because they are emotionally stunted, they operate as incomplete entities seeking hosts to drain, yet no amount of devotion can ever fill their internal void. Attempting to sustain a relationship with such a person extracts a devastating physical and psychological toll. They view your personal needs or distress merely as infuriating obstacles to their own gratification. If you require support, they respond with dramatic eye rolls, petulant pouting, or outright contempt. The emotional damage inflicted by a narcissist can register instantly or creep up on you in the middle of the night, manifesting as profound confusion, anxiety, or even physical illness. The societal pressure to forgive and forget plays directly into their hands, allowing them to repeat their emotional assaults until you are worn down to total compliance. In the darkest domestic scenarios, this need for supremacy devolves into severe psychological and physical abuse behind closed doors. Family members are subjected to humiliating rituals designed to reinforce the narcissist's godlike self-image, resulting in long-lasting trauma for spouses and children alike. Every survivor of such an ordeal echoes a similar sentiment. They were systematically forbidden from flourishing, rendered small, insignificant, and utterly defeated. In the realm of romance and family, the narcissist's conception of love is entirely transactional, utterly devoid of genuine altruism. Early courtship is frequently characterized by overwhelming grand gestures and intense, mesmerizing attentiveness, designed specifically to capture the target. Once the commitment is secured, this intoxicating charm vanishes instantly, replaced by an indifferent and hypercritical stranger. Within the home, they demand that the entire household revolve around their shifting moods and endless demands. Nothing you do will ever be deemed sufficient. They will subject you to a daily barrage of criticism regarding your appearance, habits, and fundamental worth, often enlisting children to participate in the humiliation. Your efforts to please them, whether through thoughtful gifts or dedicated service, are met with cold invalidation. The narcissist's obsession with maintaining an impeccable public image frequently leads to catastrophic financial ruin for the family. They will ruthlessly deplete shared resources to fund extravagant lifestyles, luxurious vehicles, and elite social memberships, all while forcing their spouse and children to endure severe deprivation. When the inevitable bankruptcy occurs, they walk away without a backward glance, abandoning their family to face the devastating consequences alone. Decades of enduring this relentless vitriol and public embarrassment leaves partners physically wilted and emotionally hollowed out. As parents, they are entirely incapable of providing unconditional love. Children are viewed either as extensions of the narcissist's own ego, pushed relentlessly to achieve perfection in sports or pageants to bring proxy glory to the parent, or as burdensome sources of free labor. If a child fails to meet their impossible standards, they are subjected to harsh distancing and cruel indifference. The emotional starvation inflicted upon these children creates deep, enduring psychological scars. They learn early on that their worth is entirely conditional, leaving them with a profound, lifelong emptiness. In some tragic instances, children are subjected to severe neglect, deprivation, or physical harm because the narcissistic parent simply cannot be bothered to care for them. The generational transmission of this pathology is a grim reality, as children raised without boundaries or empathy often internalize the narcissist's worldview, perpetuating the cycle of entitlement and cruelty. Navigating professional or social environments with these individuals guarantees exposure to intimidation, bullying, and boundless entitlement. A supervisor or colleague who frequently resorts to screaming, throwing objects, or publicly humiliating staff is unmistakably exhibiting severe narcissistic pathology. They operate under the delusion that organizational resources, classified information, and intellectual property belong exclusively to them, frequently taking catastrophic risks that jeopardize the entire enterprise. When their behavior crosses into physical intimidation or assault, the surrounding culture often tragically enables them, rationalizing their toxicity because they are deemed brilliant or too difficult to confront. This culture of silence and appeasement destroys morale, drives away talented individuals, and leaves victims isolated. It is imperative to meticulously document every transgression, as the narcissist will never admit fault or accurately recall their own abusive behavior. Even high-level executives find themselves paralyzed by narcissistic subordinates who utilize extortion and manipulation to hold entire companies hostage. The misguided hope that such individuals will eventually improve is a dangerous fallacy. Their behavior only escalates when accommodated. In fields demanding high public trust, such as law enforcement, medicine, or financial management, the unchecked narcissist possesses the capacity to inflict exponential damage, casually embezzling fortunes or violating the most sacred ethical boundaries. Furthermore, history issues a dire warning regarding the narcissistic personality's affinity for leadership roles within isolated sects or cults. Operating free from societal scrutiny, these leaders enforce totalitarian control, utilizing severe psychological and physical abuse to break the will of their followers. Their absolute intolerance for criticism and their grandiose delusions of divine authority inevitably culminate in horrific exploitation and, frequently, mass tragedy. The terrifying reality is that this exact pathology, when elevated to the stage of global politics, has driven the most catastrophic genocides and atrocities in human history. To systematically assess the presence and severity of these traits, a detailed behavioral framework is essential. This tool is not intended for clinical diagnosis, but rather for practical self-preservation in everyday life. By honestly evaluating observed behaviors, you can gauge where an individual falls on the spectrum of toxicity. The evaluation demands careful consideration of over 100 specific indicators. These include a pervasive projection of unearned self-importance, an insatiable demand for excessive admiration, and a chilling lack of empathy for the suffering of others. The checklist scrutinizes their tendency to interpersonally exploit friends and colleagues, their hypersensitivity to perceived slights, and their rigid belief in their own unique superiority. It asks whether the individual routinely monopolizes conversations, dismisses the achievements of others, or flies into infantile rages when denied special treatment. It probes their history of bending rules, breaking laws, or creating elaborate fictions to inflate their status. Furthermore, it examines the emotional toll they extract. Do they leave you feeling consistently drained, anxious, or fundamentally worthless? Do they engage in public belittlement, demand absolute loyalty while offering none, or treat other human beings merely as disposable objects? By meticulously checking each applicable statement, ranging from their capacity for subtle manipulation to overt acts of cruelty and boundary violation, a clearer picture of the threat level emerges. Once the behavioral evaluation is complete, the total number of identified traits determines the individual's position on the danger spectrum. A moderate accumulation of these features indicates a person who will undoubtedly cause intermittent emotional distress and prove highly difficult in collaborative or intimate settings. As the number of confirmed traits increases significantly, it signals that the individual embodies the full pathology of the narcissistic personality. This person will inevitably generate profound turmoil and suffering for anyone within their immediate sphere. When the tally reaches the highest echelons, it confirms the presence of a severely pathological individual who represents a clear and present emotional, psychological, financial, or even physical danger to you and those around you. Recognizing that you are entangled with a pathological narcissist is a crucial, albeit painful, revelation. It provides the necessary validation for the torment you have endured and serves as the catalyst for reclaiming your safety. Your subsequent actions must be dictated entirely by the severity of the threat and your specific circumstances. While a moderately difficult colleague might be managed through strict professional distancing, a highly scoring partner or family member poses a profound risk to your fundamental well-being. Your absolute first priority is the protection of yourself and your dependents. You must reject any societal or familial pressure that demands you remain in an environment where you are systematically abused or degraded. Establishing rigid, non-negotiable boundaries is a necessary first step, though you must remain fully prepared for the narcissist to continuously violate them with escalating aggression. The stark reality is that the narcissistic personality will relentlessly grind down your spirit, health, and resources until nothing remains. They are fundamentally incapable of genuine change. Consequently, creating maximum possible distance, whether physical, emotional, or professional, is almost always the only effective recourse to ensure your ultimate survival and peace of mind. Chapter 2. Fasten your seatbelts. The emotionally unstable personality. While society readily recognizes the horrific threat posed by violent predators or cold, calculating criminals, the profound devastation wrought by the emotionally unstable personality frequently remains in the shadows. The damage they inflict is profoundly interpersonal, quietly destroying lives behind closed doors, in office cubicles, and within the supposed sanctuary of the family home. Their defining characteristic is a pervasive, unpredictable emotional volatility that severely compromises their well-being and shatters their relationships. They oscillate wildly from one extreme of the emotional spectrum to the other. They can feel like absolute royalty in one moment and a destitute victim the next. To the outside observer, they can initially appear incredibly talented, charming, and highly seductive. But this facade can fracture instantaneously, revealing a hostile, impulsive, and deeply irrational core. The word mercurial perfectly captures the essence of this turbulent personality. These individuals harbor a suffocating need to be loved and secure, yet they are fundamentally unequipped to nurture a healthy, reciprocal relationship. If you draw too close, they feel engulfed and panic. If you give them space, they feel abandoned and terrified. This frantic, ceaseless quest for stability almost always leads to tragedy for themselves and everyone in their orbit. When observing the lives of certain celebrities known for a staggering number of failed marriages, such as the famously volatile unions of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, or the tragic, turbulent life of Marilyn Monroe, one is often witnessing the classic wreckage left by the emotionally unstable personality. Drawn to their vibrant energy and beauty, partners look past the early warning signs, only to discover a relentlessly demanding and disruptive force beneath the public persona. Much like the narcissist, the emotionally unstable personality demands constant accommodation. They shatter boundaries, flout rules, and insist on being the absolute center of your universe. However, whereas the narcissist demands tribute out of a profound sense of superiority, the unstable personality demands it out of an insatiable, childlike neediness. They require perpetual affirmation to simply function. They cling to those who provide this emotional sustenance, draining even the most generous, patient partners. A leading psychologist once aptly described the excruciating reality of dealing with such individuals. They might not physically destroy you, but they ensure you live in a constant state of agonizing distress, perpetually keeping a metaphorical finger in your eye. The exact origins of this pathology, whether rooted in neurology, childhood trauma, parental neglect, or a complex mixture of these factors, remain debated among professionals. What is indisputable, however, is the catastrophic toll they extract. Over time, they entirely deplete the compassion and patience of their families, friends, and colleagues. The emotional exhaustion of living with this personality is so severe that victims frequently report being driven to the brink of losing their own capacity for empathy. Law enforcement professionals and therapists alike hear chilling confessions from otherwise healthy individuals who, ground down by years of relentless torment, find themselves harboring dark thoughts of self-harm or secretly wishing for their tormentor's demise just to find peace. This shocking reality underscores the extreme toxicity of the emotionally unstable personality. The way of the emotionally unstable personality. The presentation of this personality is highly variable, making detection difficult. Some suffer quietly in a state of desperate depression, while others actively seek out conflict, turning their homes into war zones. Some manifest as tempestuous seducers whose initial allure quickly morphs into a suffocating, demanding clinginess. Regardless of the specific manifestation, a life of extreme highs and lows remains the constant baseline. While everyone experiences occasional bad moods, these dangerous personalities live in a perpetual state of emotional overdrive. This instability makes them fundamentally unreliable partners, parents, and colleagues. They are powerless to regulate their own reactions, creating an environment where those around them are forced to ride a terrifying, never-ending emotional roller coaster. Children raised by such parents learn the tragic art of hypervigilance from a heartbreakingly young age. They tiptoe through their own homes, constantly assessing the atmosphere to determine whether the parent emerging from the bedroom will be a loving saint or a cruel, unpredictable monster. It is a profoundly damaging way to grow up, leading many adult children to seek estrangement simply to survive. In the professional sphere, the effect is equally demoralizing. Entire departments will walk on eggshells, avoiding a volatile manager whose daily disposition dictates whether work can be accomplished or if the office will descend into screaming chaos. Recognizing the destructive impact of these individuals, many modern businesses have adopted strict policies to quickly purge their ranks of such toxic instability, realizing that no amount of talent can justify the systemic damage they cause. In the realm of romance, their relationships are fueled by burning intensity. Arguments of vicious acrimony are often followed by frantic, desperate reconciliations. While the unstable personality thrives on this dramatic friction, the ordinary partner inevitably burns out, choosing to walk away rather than endure the continuous emotional whiplash. Hypersensitive. A defining trait of this personality is an extreme, pathological sensitivity to any form of criticism or perceived slight. They are perpetually primed to feel victimized and will instantly demonize anyone they suspect of disloyalty, often based on entirely fabricated or wildly misinterpreted evidence. A simple benign action, like family members attending a movie without them, can be twisted into a malicious conspiracy, resulting in weeks of sulking, bitter accusations, and complete ostracization. They oscillate seamlessly between playing the grandiose monarch who demands absolute worship and the wounded outcast whom the world has cruelly wronged. Furthermore, they are meticulous wound collectors. They stockpile an endless inventory of past grievances, social faux pas, and innocent mistakes made by others. They possess a terrifyingly precise memory for any instance where they felt wronged, holding grudges for decades. They will weaponize these ancient, often trivial events during present conflicts, utilizing them to inflict maximum guilt and pain. They are completely unforgiving of basic human frailty in others, operating as perpetual victims who are forever searching for an oppressor to blame for their internal chaos. Needy and demanding, without boundaries. The emotionally unstable personality is the epitome of high maintenance. They harbor a desperate, infantile requirement to feel uniquely special and will stop at nothing to secure the undivided attention of their spouse, physician, or friend. They are masterful at creating interpersonal division, deliberately sowing discord among others so they can insert themselves as the sole recipient of someone's focus. Their attachments are formed with unnatural speed. They will intensely idolize a new acquaintance, declaring them perfect and faultless. However, the moment that person inevitably fails to meet their impossible standard of total devotion, the pedestal shatters, and the idol is instantly transformed into a hated enemy. This desperate neediness obliterates all concept of social or personal boundaries. They are entirely unconcerned with protocols, schedules, or the privacy of others. They will bombard you with messages at all hours, show up uninvited and enraged at professional offices demanding immediate attention, and view the word no as a personal attack. They may resort to terrifying stalking behaviors, tracking a former lover across state lines, intercepting mail, or vandalizing property to punish those who attempt to enforce boundaries. Their actions are dictated entirely by their frantic emotional state, demonstrating a chilling disregard for the law or the psychological safety of others. Manipulative. To secure their desires and stave off their ultimate terror of abandonment, these individuals employ a vast arsenal of manipulation. They will weep, rage, orchestrate massive guilt trips, and fabricate severe illnesses. They possess a breathtaking capacity for deceit, lying seamlessly to force a partner's hand or garner sympathy. The most terrifying and potent weapon in their manipulative arsenal, however, is the threat of suicide. When they feel they are losing control of a situation or a relationship, they may threaten or attempt self-harm. It is absolutely critical to understand that any threat of suicide must be met with an immediate call to emergency services. You are not a trained clinician, and attempting to manage this extreme manipulation yourself only reinforces their dangerous behavior. By calling professionals, you ensure their physical safety while simultaneously refusing to be held hostage by their emotional blackmail. Many partners endure years of repeated suicide threats, mistakenly believing their compliance will eventually calm the storm. It never does. Accommodating this ultimate manipulation only empowers the unstable personality, trapping the victim in a cycle of profound terror and control that, tragically, sometimes culminates in actual lethal violence against themselves or their partners. Irrational, all-or-nothing thinking. Attempting to use logic to calm an emotionally unstable personality during an outburst is an exercise in utter futility. Their cognitive processing is rigidly binary. They exist in a world of absolute black and white, with no capacity to perceive nuance or context. You are either entirely with them, or you are a treacherous enemy. This irrationality leads to unpredictable, highly dangerous reactions to minor frustrations. A forgotten bottle of sunscreen can trigger a terrifying rage, prompting them to threaten to throw themselves from a speeding vehicle, entirely indifferent to the severe trauma they are inflicting on the terrified children trapped in the back seat with them. Because they lack an internal compass, they are also highly susceptible to external dogmas, often gravitating toward fringe groups, rigid cults, or charismatic charlatans who offer a simplistic, structured worldview. The tragic history of infamous cults reveals a congregation largely composed of these unstable individuals who surrender their autonomy in exchange for unconditional acceptance and a strict set of rules that temporarily soothe their internal chaos. Words that describe the emotionally unstable personality. When survivors attempt to describe the reality of engaging with these individuals, the language they use is raw, exhausted, and deeply traumatized. They do not use clinical terms. They speak of an existence defined by chaos. They describe their former partners and parents as beguiling chameleons who morph into relentless tormentors. The relationship is remembered as a catastrophic train wreck, a whirlwind of exhausting, irrational, and demanding behavior. They use words like suffocating, vindictive, delusional, and exhausting. The emotionally unstable personality is seen as an impossible temperamental diva who operates with reckless, unhinged intensity, leaving a wake of bitter, destructive, and deeply painful memories. Impetuous, impulsive, sensation-seeking. To escape their pervasive, agonizing feelings of emptiness, or simply to feel a surge of life, the unstable personality frequently engages in highly reckless, impulsive behaviors. This often manifests as extreme sexual promiscuity, utilizing physical intimacy as a desperate, ultimately ineffective substitute for genuine emotional connection. They may gravitate toward dangerous companions, actively seeking the thrill of criminal associates or high-risk lifestyles, heedless of the catastrophic consequences. This impulsivity frequently bleeds into severe substance abuse, as they attempt to self-medicate their internal turmoil, further skewing their already compromised decision-making abilities. They may engage in ruinous financial spending, serial shoplifting, reckless driving, or severe eating disorders. In their darkest moments, this sensation-seeking devolves into compulsive physical self-harm. The act of cutting, burning, or otherwise injuring themselves is utilized as a morbid coping mechanism, a physical release of their intolerable psychological pain, or a desperate attempt to feel anything other than their chronic, echoing emptiness. Furthermore, some exhibit a deeply unsettling, almost sadistic need to provoke conflict, deliberately instigating vicious fights with loved ones simply to generate an intense emotional reaction, feeding off the surrounding chaos. Their effect on you. The initial stages of an encounter with an unstable personality can feel intoxicating, as their intense focus makes you feel like a savior or a hero. However, this illusion rapidly disintegrates, replaced by profound psychological and physical exhaustion. You will find yourself constantly thrust into the role of rescuer, bailing them out of financial disasters, legal troubles, and emotional collapses. Living with them requires a state of perpetual hyper-alertness. You become a prisoner of their shifting moods, abandoning your own life to meticulously manage their emotional environment, terrified of triggering the next explosive outburst. The physical toll of this chronic stress is devastating, frequently resulting in severe anxiety, clinical depression, and a complete mirroring of the abuser's emotional chaos. Their rage is not confined to harsh words. It frequently escalates into shocking acts of physical destruction and violence. They will shatter cherished possessions, destroy property, and inflict severe physical abuse upon spouses and children. The history of domestic violence is heavily populated by this specific personality type. The danger they present is not merely psychological. Their pathological fear of abandonment can drive them to commit extreme, lethal acts of violence against a partner attempting to leave, choosing to destroy the object of their affection rather than endure the agony of rejection. The emotionally unstable personality in relationships. In the dating world, these personalities accelerate intimacy at an alarming rate, desperate to lock down a source of stability. They will issue profound, dramatic declarations of love within hours of meeting, overwhelming their target with an intoxicating, though entirely manufactured, intensity. While initially flattering, this rapid attachment quickly becomes a suffocating trap. The honeymoon phase inevitably crashes, replaced by ceaseless, irrational acrimony. When the exhausted partner attempts to sever ties, the unstable personality reacts with terrifying ferocity. They will launch campaigns of harassment, relentlessly bombarding their ex with calls, invading their workplace, and utilizing extreme emotional blackmail to force compliance. They may stalk their former partner, physically assault them, or orchestrate vicious smear campaigns to destroy their reputation. The danger is amplified exponentially when children are involved. The unstable parent is entirely incapable of providing consistent, unconditional love. Children are subjected to terrifying mood swings, enduring severe physical or psychological punishment for minor infractions, only to be immediately demanded to provide comfort to their abuser. The emotional neglect is profound. The parent's total self-absorption leaves the child with a lifelong, agonizing void. These children are raised in a theater of trauma, forced to suppress their own needs and live as perpetual sentinels, forever guarding against the next unpredictable emotional storm. The duty of the healthy parent in this scenario is absolute. The child must be protected and distanced from the toxic environment, as the unstable parent is highly unlikely to ever change their destructive behavior. Encounters with the emotionally unstable personality. In social and professional settings, society often attempts to minimize the threat of these individuals by applying euphemisms, labeling them merely as difficult, dramatic, or prone to outbursts. This dangerous sugarcoating obscures the severe toxicity they bring to any environment. In the workplace, their presence is characterized by high turnover, plummeting morale, and constant interpersonal conflict. Colleagues will go to extreme lengths to avoid collaboration, recognizing that professional interaction guarantees exposure to irrational hostility and blame. While they may possess the intellect or talent to achieve professional success, it always comes at a massive cost to the organizational culture. They rule by fear and intimidation, creating an atmosphere where genuine communication is impossible. Detecting this personality requires looking past their public veneer, which they can often maintain for short periods, and focusing on the trail of interpersonal destruction they inevitably leave behind. Your dangerous personalities checklist. To accurately gauge the threat level, you must systematically evaluate their behaviors. This involves scrutinizing a comprehensive list of over 100 specific indicators. Do they subject you to a roller coaster of emotional highs and lows? Do they react with intense, disproportionate rage to minor frustrations? Have they threatened suicide as a manipulation tactic? Do they exhibit a terrifying lack of behavioral boundaries, acting outrageously in public or private? The assessment asks you to consider their history of unstable relationships, their tendency to play the perpetual victim, and their capacity to drain you of all emotional energy. Do you feel like you are constantly walking on eggshells in their presence? Do they engage in reckless, impulsive behaviors like substance abuse, unsafe sex, or self-mutilation? Do they demand absolute loyalty while turning on a dime to demonize you? By carefully checking each statement that applies, focusing strictly on observed behavior rather than hopeful rationalizations, you can strip away the confusion and accurately identify the presence of this highly destructive pathology. Scoring. After completing the behavioral evaluation, the total tally provides a critical assessment of their toxicity. A moderate score indicates an individual who will undoubtedly cause significant intermittent distress and prove highly challenging in any collaborative environment. A higher score confirms the presence of a fully manifested emotionally unstable personality. This individual requires intense professional intervention and will inevitably generate profound chaos, anxiety, and suffering for anyone intimately connected to them. If the score reaches the highest tier, It is a stark warning that you are dealing with an individual who presents a clear, immediate, and severe psychological, emotional, and potentially physical danger to themselves and everyone around them. Immediate actions. If your evaluation confirms that you are entangled with an emotionally unstable personality, you must recognize that you cannot fix them. They require intense, long-term intervention from highly trained mental health professionals, a path they must choose willingly. Your attempts to manage or cure their pathology will only result in your own psychological depletion and potential victimization. Your immediate priority must be the establishment of rigid, unyielding boundaries to protect your own well-being. If they threaten self-harm, you must immediately involve emergency services. Never attempt to negotiate with a suicide threat. Most importantly, if children are present, you bear an absolute moral obligation to shield them from the devastating psychological trauma inflicted by this personality. Given their extreme resistance to change and the profound damage they cause, securing physical and emotional distance is almost always the most necessary and effective strategy for ensuring your own survival and peace of mind. Chapter 3. Trust no one and you'll never get hurt. The paranoid personality. In a compelling cinematic portrayal from the end of the 20th century, an actor brilliantly captured the essence of a deeply reclusive and rigid neighbor, a retired military man whose home was run like a fortified bunker. The character's wife was reduced to a frightened, silent shadow, and every ring of the doorbell triggered an intense, interrogative freeze rather than a welcoming opening of the door. This man existed in a state of perpetual fear of strangers, minorities, and inquisitive neighbors, utterly convinced that the world was collapsing and only he understood the true threat. He terrorized his own family with his inflexible, moralistic, and irritable nature, demanding absolute compliance and maintaining a joyless, isolated existence. While it might be tempting to dismiss such a figure as a mere Hollywood exaggeration, the chilling reality is that millions of individuals share these exact characteristics. They are paranoid personalities, and their presence in everyday life is both common and profoundly destructive. Consider the neighborhood recluse who only emerges to shout at playing children, keeping a relentless vigil from behind a curtained window, policing his wife's interactions, and treating every innocent knock at the door as a potential threat requiring police intervention. To the uneducated eye, such a person might simply be deemed eccentric or odd. However, without an understanding of this specific pathology, neighbors and family members endure repeated, bewildering humiliations as their attempts at kindness are met with snarling hostility. The paranoid personality is entirely consumed by an irrational, boundless mistrust and a pervasive fear. Their thinking is so rigid that it becomes utterly impervious to logic or reason, rendering them intensely judgmental and biased. They actively search for the dark clouds surrounding every silver lining, viewing any altruistic gesture as a calculated maneuver with a hidden malicious agenda. While a healthy inner warning system protects us from genuine danger, the paranoid individual's alarm system is permanently jammed in overdrive, constantly sounding alerts about neighbors, co-workers, entire ethnic groups, or the government. During extensive years in law enforcement, it became apparent that these individuals consistently leave a wake of psychological and sometimes physical damage. Reception areas and phone lines of federal agencies are frequently inundated with their complaints about vast conspiracies, perceived enemies, and governmental failures. Spouses often sit in silent, furrowed agony while these individuals rant, having exhausted all other avenues of help. Attempting to use logic to dissuade them is a futile endeavor. They seek only a pliant audience to validate their unyielding beliefs. The media often portrays them as wild-eyed and crazed, yet the truth is far more nuanced. Some present as quiet, almost shy recluses who harbor a silent, unyielding suspicion, while others are vociferous, combative figures who actively seek out arguments and confrontations at public demonstrations. Their intellectual capacity ranges widely. Some may be mental lightweights, while others possess genius-level intellects, utilizing their brilliance to construct elaborate, untraceable methods of violence from remote, isolated cabins to wage war against society and technology. A foundational element of their existence is a hyper-suspicious, fearful, and secretive nature. This irrational suspicion compels them to constantly monitor the words and actions of everyone around them, desperately searching for malicious intent in the most benign social interactions. They are intensely secretive, often lying to conceal their true thoughts or whereabouts, and may even lock away possessions from their own family members, transforming normal privacy into a fortress of paranoia. The specific targets of their fear are limitless, ranging from specific religious or ethnic groups to electrical grids, water supplies, medical professionals, or simply the coworker sitting in the next cubicle. Over time, these fixations inevitably reveal themselves through their eccentric or dangerous behaviors. Some are so profoundly mistrustful that they maintain meticulous logs tracking the movements of everyone in their vicinity, a chilling behavior exhibited by infamous historical figures and reclusive criminals alike. Furthermore, they are highly opinionated, argumentative, and prone to intense hate. Healthy adaptability allows individuals to embrace new ideas and accept that others hold differing beliefs. The paranoid personality, however, interprets their own hypersensitivity as a form of superior insight, leaving no room for debate. To them, empirical evidence is meaningless. Any attempt to reason is viewed as a conspiratorial attack. They masterfully distort history and selectively twist facts to align with their rigid ideology, often using obscure references to justify horrifying acts of violence. When this rigid, selective memory merges with irrational fear, it brews a toxic, dehumanizing hatred. If pathological narcissism is added to this volatile mixture, the result is an individual capable of walking into a school or a public space and casually taking innocent lives, feeling entirely justified and uniquely entitled to act as judge, jury, and executioner. For the most dangerous among them, violence is the only magical solution capable of achieving their grandiose, out-of-bounds objectives. Like other dangerous individuals, they are meticulous wound collectors and grudge holders, but they elevate this practice to an art form. The slightest, most innocent mistake is permanently recorded as a treacherous betrayal. They never forget or forgive, holding grievances for decades and using historical or perceived wrongs to justify their present hostility. Whether drawing upon centuries-old religious conflicts or recent governmental actions, they utilize this collection of wounds to fuel their paranoia and validate their destructive behavior, casting a boundless net of blame and retribution. When survivors and victims describe the reality of engaging with a paranoid personality, they use an extensive vocabulary of exhaustion and fear. They speak of individuals who are adversarial, apocalyptical, bigoted, and callous. The paranoid person is remembered as a combative, controlling, and cruel fanatic who lives in a constant state of delusion. They are described as guarded, hard-headed, and hypercritical haters who make everyday life impossible. Words like litigious, menacing, obsessive, and prejudiced frequently surface, painting a portrait of a scary, unforgiving zealot who views the world through a terrifyingly rigid and suspicious lens. The effect they have on those around them is profoundly draining. They systematically alienate everyone, slowly exhausting the goodwill and charity of their community. Living with them means existing in a state of constant tension, forced to adopt their enemies and view the world through their fearful prism, lest you be deemed a traitor yourself. Their presence sucks the joy out of life, replacing laughter with a tense, edgy vigilance. They will ruin vacations, disrupt workplaces, and force their families to constantly adapt to their foreboding worldview. In the most extreme and tragic cases, they may isolate their families completely, dragging them into remote wilderness areas or destructive cults to prepare for an imagined apocalypse, sometimes leading to the ultimate tragedy of mass loss of life. Within the realm of intimate relationships, effusive warmth and connection are entirely absent. They may claim to care, but their constant preoccupation with perceived threats prevents any genuine sharing or trust. Conversations are painfully one-dimensional, inevitably circling back to their current fixation. Because they perceive all conflict as a direct attack, the normal fluctuations of a relationship are impossible to navigate, forcing the partner into a state of silent, fearful compliance. In the early stages of dating, they actively assess potential mates for pliability, quickly abandoning anyone who demonstrates a skeptical or questioning mind. Once committed, the paranoid partner exhibits terrifying, unfounded jealousy, monitoring phone records, controlling communications, and isolating their spouse from all friends and family. Their absolute distrust dictates the boundaries of the household, sometimes preventing children from attending school to protect them from imagined corrupting influences, effectively inculcating their own paranoia into the next generation. Encounters with this personality in professional and social settings guarantee exposure to a difficult, contrarian malcontent. In educational environments, despite their potential intellect, their lack of interpersonal skills and profound suspicion of authority lead to failure and alienation. In the workplace, they are the perpetual complainers, questioning management, initiating frivolous lawsuits, and actively sabotaging colleagues they perceive as enemies. Even highly successful individuals with this pathology lead isolated, tormented lives, trusting no one and ruling their empires through fear. Organizations often mistakenly attempt to manage them by transferring them between departments, failing to recognize that the pathology moves with them and can explode into violence without warning. When these deeply paranoid individuals achieve positions of ultimate political power, the resulting devastation is unfathomable, leading to the systematic extermination of millions in the name of their irrational fears. To accurately assess the presence of this specific danger, a thorough evaluation of observed behaviors is required. This involves considering if the individual is preoccupied with unjustified doubts about loyalty, constantly suspects exploitation, and perceives benign actions as threatening. It requires noting their tendency to hold grudges, their quickness to anger, and their unwarranted jealousy. Do they view the world as a fundamentally hostile place, fear technology or institutions, and collect evidence of perceived conspiracies? Do they demand absolute agreement, isolate their family, and react with hostility when their rigid beliefs are challenged? By systematically documenting these traits, a clear measure of their toxicity is established. Once evaluated, the accumulation of these specific behaviors reveals the severity of the threat. A moderate presence indicates a highly irritating, argument-prone individual who will significantly drain your emotional reserves. A higher concentration confirms a deeply paranoid personality who will inevitably generate profound turmoil and psychological distress for anyone within their reach. When the behavioral markers reach the highest levels, the assessment confirms the presence of an incredibly unstable and potentially dangerous individual who poses a severe physical, psychological, and emotional risk. If it becomes clear that you are dealing with a heavily paranoid personality, you face a formidable and exhausting challenge. Attempting to persuade, argue with, or logically debate them is entirely counterproductive and will likely result in you being classified as an enemy. Because they genuinely believe their heightened suspicion is a virtue, they will almost never willingly seek professional help. If their behavior occurs in the workplace, they represent a significant liability and must be managed with extreme caution, especially during terminations or reprimands, as these events can trigger violent retaliation. If their behavior at home or in your personal life crosses the line into unbearable control, dehumanization, or threats of violence, the only viable solution is to secure maximum distance. You cannot fix their irrational fears, but you can and must prioritize your own safety and peace of mind by removing yourself from their toxic, suspicious world. Chapter 4. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. The Predator. The gaze was absolutely steady, devoid of warmth and utterly reptilian. Staring back into those unblinking eyes, a profound physical reaction took over. It was the 1970s, and a young law enforcement officer stood in a hallway having just apprehended a burglar. The suspect was fully compliant and securely handcuffed, yet a deep, instinctual terror caused the officer's hands to tremble so violently that the bullets rattled audibly inside the service revolver. This was not a response to immediate physical danger, but rather a primal, subconscious recognition of pure malice. A subsequent background check confirmed the intuition. The man was a hardened, violent recidivist. This visceral encounter served as a lifelong lesson about the silent, invisible alarm bells our bodies ring when we are in the presence of a human predator. Eventually, almost everyone will cross paths with an individual of this nature. These are people who operate completely unburdened by conscience, empathy, or remorse. While healthy individuals build their lives upon a foundation of mutual respect and meaningful relationships, predators view the world through a singular, chilling lens: exploitation. Other human beings are not seen as equals, but rather as tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. If they desire money, they will drain an elderly relative's life savings. If they need a vehicle, they will steal it. They are unconstrained by societal rules, viewing laws, moral boundaries, and basic human decency as mere inconveniences meant for weaker individuals. Because they are untethered from human compassion, predators are masterful at identifying vulnerability. They possess an almost predatory software running constantly in the background, scanning for the frail, the injured, the trusting, and the naive. They target the helpful pedestrian, the lone teenager, or the unsuspecting homeowner. Furthermore, they expertly camouflage themselves within the most trusted institutions of society. They infiltrate hospitals, religious organizations, and athletic programs, acutely aware that the mantle of professional legitimacy provides the perfect cover for their destructive agendas. While society fixates on the notorious serial killers, figures like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, or Jeffrey Dahmer, or infamous outlaws and mobsters like Jesse James, Al Capone, and John Gotti, the true danger extends far beyond the headlines. The predator is the abusive spouse, the embezzling executive, the neighborhood burglar, and the corrupt official. It is a fatal misconception to believe that location guarantees safety. George J. Trapol, a chemist, viewed his noisy neighbors as a nuisance and chillingly solved his problem by slipping thallium into their Coke bottles. Gary Tyson and Randy Greenewalt, having escaped from prison, were offered help by the John Lyons family on an Arizona highway. They rewarded this Good Samaritan act by murdering the entire family. In Hyde, England, patients believed they were in the safest possible hands with the respected Dr. Harold Shipman, yet he murdered over 200 of them for financial gain. Juanita Hoyt suffocated her own infants simply because she did not want to deal with their crying. True crime author Anne Rule worked alongside Ted Bundy at a crisis clinic, completely unaware that she was sitting next to a monster. Safety is not dictated by geography. It is dictated by the absence of a predator. The trajectory of a predator's life is defined by a calculated, relentless pursuit of their own desires, leaving a massive debris field of human suffering in their wake. For every direct victim, countless family members and friends are devastated. Bernard Madoff's colossal Ponzi scheme not only bankrupted thousands, but led directly to the suicide of his own son, Mark, who could not bear the torment of his father's betrayal. Predators do not learn from their mistakes in order to rehabilitate themselves. They learn in order to refine their predatory skills. Consider the tragic reality of a young man named Julian, who began his deceit in childhood by stealing from his parents. Over the years, his crimes escalated to forging checks, selling his father's car for parts, and completely draining his mother's retirement accounts, forcing her back to work in her 70s. His father died a broken man, and at the funeral, Julian's only concern was pawning his father's watch and inquiring about the will. At the core of this personality is an absolute void of empathy. When confronted with the pain of others, their reaction is a flat, chilling indifference. The notorious BTK killer, Dennis Rader, recounted his torturous murders with a terrifyingly calm, matter-of-fact demeanor. Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter in a cellar for 24 years, subjecting her to unimaginable horrors, later shrugging it off by stating he simply had an evil streak. They know the difference between right and wrong. They simply choose evil. If they ever express regret, it is entirely contrived. They will blame the victim, just as Jodi Arias attempted to blame the former lover she brutally slaughtered, weaving elaborate justifications for their cruelty. This coldness is accompanied by a highly calculated and controlling nature. Henry Lee Lucas chillingly noted that killing someone was as casual to him as walking outdoors. They use language not to connect, but to ensnare and manipulate. They are fluent in the vocabulary of seduction and false promises. Jack Henry Abbott, a violent inmate, wrote a compelling book and convinced the literary elite, including Norman Mailer, to champion his parole. Just 6 weeks after his release, he stabbed a man to death over a minor slight. Jerry Sandusky utilized his status as a beloved coach and an ever-ready smile to systematically prey upon vulnerable children. Predators leverage information and fear, just as mobsters extort businesses. Or, as Hermann Goering manipulated his American guards into providing the poison he used to evade the hangman's noose. Some, like Israel Keyes, who buried kill kits across the country, derive an intoxicating, godlike thrill from holding the power of life and death over their victims, a sadistic joy echoed by Charles Ng as he taunted his terrified captives on videotape. Conversely, many predators are driven by intense, uninhibited urges. They are thrill seekers like Bonnie and Clyde, craving the adrenaline rush of defying authority. They may engage in reckless sexual behavior, intentionally spreading life-threatening diseases like HIV, as seen in the cases of New Sean Williams and Anthony Whitfield, demonstrating a sociopathic disregard for human life. Their extreme sensitivity to perceived insults can trigger instantaneous lethal retaliation, a trait epitomized by mafia hitman Richard the Iceman Kuklinski. When this inherent volatility is fueled by substance abuse, their inhibitions vanish entirely, rendering them exponentially more dangerous. The impact of allowing a predator into one's life is universally catastrophic. They will exhaust your resources, demand your complicity in their deceit, and betray you without hesitation. Michael Chad Boyson was welcomed home from prison by his loving grandparents. Hours later, he murdered them. The psychological toll of this constant vigilance is profound. Victims frequently describe a visceral physical reaction, hairs standing on end or a creeping sensation of dread. It is imperative to trust these biological warnings, the gift of fear. Society conditions us to confuse niceness with goodness. Predators can be exceptionally nice, offering to carry groceries or clowning for children, but this is merely a manipulative behavior. Goodness is an intrinsic moral quality, and predators are entirely devoid of it. In intimate relationships, the predator operates as a lethal parasite. A woman named Elizabeth spent nearly $40,000 on a husband who refused to work, only to have him demand her retirement savings when she finally evicted him. But financial ruin is often the best-case scenario. Scott Peterson murdered his pregnant wife, Lacey, when he decided he wanted a different life. Drew Peterson's wives suffered abuse, mysterious deaths, and disappearances. Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald slaughtered his family and staged the scene to blame non-existent intruders. The danger extends to the children who are either abused, neglected, or forced into criminal enterprises. John Walker recruited his own son into his espionage ring. John Gotti brought his son into the mafia. The Menendez brothers executed their parents for their fortune. Mothers like Marybeth Tinning, Diane Downs, and Krista Decker murdered their own children for convenience or attention. In one chilling instance, a mother named Carla discovered her new husband sexually grooming her 14-year-old daughter. When confronted, the predator attempted to gaslight the mother and manipulate the child. Carla threw him out immediately, but the emotional debris field remained. Encounters with predators can occur anywhere. They are the transient strangers, like Joran van der Sloot, who murdered Natalie Holloway in Aruba and Stephanie Flores in Peru. They are the neighbors, like Ariel Castro, who imprisoned young women for a decade. They adapt to their environments, like Charles Cullen, the night nurse who murdered dozens of patients, or Rita Crundwell, the comptroller who embezzled $53 million. They reach the highest echelons of the corporate world, orchestrating devastating frauds like the Enron collapse. When predators ascend to political power, the resulting devastation is unfathomable. Tyrants like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, and Bashar al-Assad view the slaughter of millions not as a tragedy, but as a mere statistic in their quest for absolute control. To accurately identify a predator, one must look past the charming facade and meticulously evaluate their behavioral history through an unforgiving lens. Do they have a history of exploiting others, breaking the law, or engaging in reckless, impulsive acts? Do they display a chilling lack of remorse for the damage they cause? Do they target the weak, the elderly, or the gullible while exhibiting a haughty, arrogant contempt for societal norms? Do they stare with an unflinching, reptilian gaze that makes you profoundly uncomfortable? The accumulation of these traits is a blaring siren of imminent peril. When confronted with a predator, the only viable course of action is immediate and absolute distancing. These individuals are fundamentally broken and remarkably resistant to any form of positive change. They cannot be rehabilitated through love, nor can they be reasoned into empathy. Any attempt to manage or appease them will only result in further exploitation and profound personal destruction. Establishing impenetrable boundaries and severing all ties is the ultimate, necessary act of self-preservation. Chapter 5. 1 is bad, 2 is terrible, 3 is lethal. Combination personalities. Up to this point, our exploration has isolated each dangerous personality to examine its distinct psychological machinery. Isolating these archetypes serves a crucial educational purpose, allowing us to grasp the specific warning signs unique to each pathology. Yet human nature is rarely so neatly compartmentalized. The reality is far more complex and significantly more perilous. Dangerous personalities frequently present as amalgamations, possessing traits from two or more of these destructive profiles. Medical professionals refer to this overlapping as comorbidity. Just as everyday individuals exhibit a spectrum of varying personality traits that make them multifaceted, so too do those capable of inflicting severe harm. When a person harbors the dark features of multiple dangerous types, the threat level does not merely add up, it multiplies exponentially. While the risk intensifies with these combinations, identifying the specific underlying pathologies becomes a formidable challenge even for seasoned professionals. A dangerous personality's presentation is not static. It fluctuates depending on environmental stresses, opportunities, and internal moods. The emotionally unstable individual who historically relied on verbal tirades might unexpectedly escalate to physical violence against a child. The detached, self-absorbed narcissist may marry and transform into an oppressively controlling and suspicious tyrant. Because behavior is fluid, our assessment must be equally dynamic. We cannot afford the dangerous luxury of assuming a toxic individual will organically improve over time. Analyzing these complex overlapping traits requires a holistic approach, carefully observing behaviors without prematurely locking an individual into a single diagnostic box. If we fixate entirely on one glaring trait, like a pilot suffering from target fixation who stares so intently at a single landmark that he crashes into a mountain, we risk ignoring equally lethal secondary characteristics. For instance, upon meeting someone who is exceptionally charming, brimming with grandiose plans but lacking any tangible achievements, one might quickly label them a narcissist. While accurate, stopping the assessment, there could be a fatal error. If we cease our observations, we might miss the fact that this person also possesses a transient lifestyle, lacks a verifiable history, and harbors a chilling indifference to the rules of society, telltale markers of a predator. True situational awareness demands that we look at the totality of the individual's actions. When someone exhibits an overwhelming need for control coupled with a deeply vindictive streak, they are revealing a terrifying blend of paranoia and predation. The exact proportion of these toxic elements matters less than the glaring reality that a critical threshold of danger has been crossed. When we examine the annals of history, the devastating potential of these combined pathologies becomes horrifyingly clear. Consider the fusion of the paranoid and the narcissistic personality. This specific amalgamation has been the driving force behind some of humanity's darkest chapters. Leaders who demand absolute adoration and view themselves as infallible while simultaneously harboring an acute, irrational fear of endless enemies inevitably unleash mass destruction when granted unchecked power. A historical figure who renames cities after himself to feed an insatiable ego, yet systematically exterminates millions of his own citizens and top military brass out of unfounded suspicion, perfectly encapsulates this lethal blend. Such individuals exist not only in history books, but in modern society. From dictators orchestrating ethnic cleansing to lone extremists who bomb public squares and gun down innocents to save their nation from perceived threats, the combination of grandiosity and hypersuspicion is invariably a catalyst for profound tragedy. This specific threat becomes particularly acute when the paranoid narcissist isolates themselves from society. Removed from the dampening effect of normal social interaction, their bizarre ideologies and festering grievances echo in a closed loop. They marinate in their own hatred, entirely convinced of their supreme righteousness. When their demands for recognition are met with rejection or indifference by the wider world, violence frequently becomes their chosen megaphone. They violently force society to acknowledge them, utilizing devastation as the ultimate expression of their distorted superiority. Equally terrifying is the merger of the narcissist and the predator. The capacity to systematically prey upon fellow human beings requires a fundamental belief that others are utterly worthless, coupled with a belief in one's own supreme entitlement. The most notorious serial killers throughout history have perfectly embodied this chilling synthesis. They operate with a godlike arrogance, feeling uniquely authorized to hold the power of life and death over their victims. They approach their horrific acts not with frenzy, but with a cold, calculating detachment, viewing human lives merely as disposable props for their own gratification. This same aggressive narcissism fuels the sociopathic con artist or the cult leader who manipulates vulnerable followers, stripping them of their autonomy and resources with absolute reptilian indifference. As we delve deeper into the abyss of human pathology, we encounter individuals who harbor the core features of three dangerous types. The infamous cult leaders who have orchestrated mass suicides frequently display this triad of terror. Their demand for absolute worship reveals their narcissism. Their enforcement of isolation and draconian punishments highlights their predatory nature, and their apocalyptic fear of the outside world underscores their profound paranoia. These individuals construct elaborate, inescapable traps for their followers, utilizing charisma to draw them in and psychological terror to ensure they never leave. When individuals orchestrate global atrocities, they are often driven by this exact triad: a grandiose belief in their historical destiny, a predatory willingness to slaughter thousands of innocents, and a paranoid worldview that casts entire nations as demonic adversaries. It is a grim reality that some individuals encompass the acute features of all four dangerous personalities. These are the highly volatile, completely unconstrained forces of destruction. They may be historical tyrants who torture thousands, or they may be the quiet spouse living next door who slowly dismantles their family behind drawn blinds, a partner who demands total submission, constantly monitors communications out of irrational jealousy, lashes out with unpredictable emotional explosions, and ultimately resorts to lethal violence to maintain control, is demonstrating the full spectrum of these pathologies. Victims of such individuals often sense the impending doom, documenting the abuse and the tightening noose of control, yet they frequently feel paralyzed by fear or the misplaced hope that faith or patience will somehow alter the abuser's nature. Tragically, a dangerous personality does not yield to hope. The peril we face is magnified exponentially when dangerous personalities collaborate. The penal system strictly forbids convicted felons from associating upon release because experience has proven that toxic individuals catalyze one another. When two deeply flawed people join forces, they validate each other's distorted worldviews, entirely removing the friction of a normal moral compass. A paranoid individual's simmering hatred can be weaponized by a predatory partner, resulting in a collaborative killing spree that neither might have fully executed alone. They feed on each other's dark energy, creating a shared madness that frequently culminates in spectacular violence. The recognition of these overlapping traits is not meant to paralyze us with fear, but to equip us with a profound, life-saving clarity. When an individual consistently leaves you emotionally drained, routinely violates social norms or the law, manipulates situations for selfish gain, acts impulsively without regard for consequences, and poses a threat to your safety, the exact diagnostic label is secondary. You do not need a clinical degree to recognize that you are in the presence of someone who is fundamentally broken and inherently hazardous. While no one can predict the precise future actions of a complex human being, past behavior remains the most reliable indicator of what is to come. Individuals burdened by these severe character flaws rarely seek the grueling path of self-improvement. Their trajectory is set, and it points toward continued exploitation and suffering for anyone caught in their gravitational pull. We must accept the stark reality that some individuals cross a threshold into pure malice, abandoning all remnants of human empathy. We may long to understand what fractured them, or recall a time before their darkness fully manifested. But such curiosity must never override the imperative of self-preservation. When you are in the presence of someone who combines these destructive elements, the only logical response is absolute vigilance and immediate, unyielding distance. Chapter 6. Self-defense against dangerous personalities. Living in a world shared with individuals who possess profound character flaws necessitates a fundamental shift in how one navigates daily life. Acknowledging that these distinct pathologies exist is merely the preliminary stage of protection. True safety demands the implementation of a rigorous, practical defense strategy. The cornerstone of this defense is an uncompromising acceptance of reality. Society frequently encourages a perilous optimism, suggesting that every individual inherently possesses goodness, or that toxic behavior is merely a temporary phase born of circumstance. This deeply ingrained cultural conditioning must be dismantled. When confronted with a dangerous personality, hope is not a strategy. It is a profound vulnerability. The reality is that individuals exhibiting severe traits of narcissism, emotional instability, paranoia, or predation are fundamentally wired in a manner that defies ordinary rehabilitation. They do not view their actions as problematic, and consequently, they lack any genuine motivation to change. To protect oneself, one must adopt a starkly realistic worldview, recognize malice for what it is, strip away the rationalizations, and accept that past behavior remains the single most accurate predictor of future actions. Trusting one's intuition is paramount. That visceral physical sensation of unease, the sudden chill, the tightening of the stomach, or the inexplicable urge to flee, is an ancient biological alarm system designed specifically to detect danger. Ignoring this primal warning in favor of politeness or societal expectation has led countless individuals into profound suffering. Moving through life safely requires transitioning from passive looking to active, critical observation. Looking is a superficial act, a mere registration of an individual's physical presence or their carefully curated public persona. Observation, conversely, is a dynamic and penetrative process. It demands intense scrutiny of the discrepancies between what a person says and what they consistently do. A charming demeanor may easily mask a history of broken promises, sudden eruptions of unprovoked rage, or a chilling lack of empathy during moments of crisis. Active observation involves meticulously tracking behavioral patterns over time, rather than evaluating isolated out-of-context incidents. It requires noting how an individual treats those who offer them no immediate benefit, such as service workers, subordinates, or the vulnerable, as this frequently reveals their true, unfiltered character. Furthermore, effective observation necessitates a deliberate suspension of one's own biases and desires. When someone desperately wants a romantic relationship to succeed or a lucrative business partnership to flourish, they subconsciously filter out glaring warning signs. To observe accurately, one must look at the raw data of a person's conduct with the dispassionate clarity of a seasoned investigator, recognizing that the most dangerous individuals are often the most adept at initially presenting themselves as flawless and perfectly aligned with your desires. The application of these defensive strategies becomes intensely complicated when the dangerous personality is deeply embedded in one's life. The threat is rarely an anonymous stranger lurking in a dark alley. It is frequently a spouse, a parent, a crucial colleague, or a long-standing friend. These complex situations are fraught with profound emotional and financial entanglements that make the immediate severing of ties seem utterly impossible. In familial scenarios, the intense pressure to maintain the illusion of harmony can be suffocating, often demanding that the victim endure the abuse in silence to avoid fracturing the family unit. When children are involved, the stakes are elevated to an excruciating degree, as the healthy parent must navigate the treacherous waters of protecting their offspring while managing a highly volatile or vindictive partner. In the professional sphere, confronting a toxic supervisor or a predatory peer can severely jeopardize one's livelihood, reputation, and entire career trajectory. These scenarios require meticulous planning and profound caution. Exiting an intimate relationship with a dangerous personality is universally recognized as the moment of greatest peril, as their pathological need for control or their terrifying fear of abandonment frequently triggers severe, sometimes lethal, retaliation. Navigating these complexities demands the strategic assembly of a trusted support system, the quiet, careful securing of personal resources, and a resolute commitment to establishing unyielding boundaries, even when doing so invites immediate and intense conflict. To successfully untangle oneself from these destructive dynamics, it is absolutely essential to systematically catalogue the abusive behaviors. Human memory is frequently distorted by prolonged trauma, and the continuous cycle of conflict, gaslighting, and manipulation can leave a victim feeling fundamentally disoriented, ultimately questioning their own sanity and perception of events. Documenting specific incidents, the irrational outbursts, the calculated deceit, the blatant boundary violations, and the insidious emotional coercion serves as a crucial, immovable anchor to reality. This process of cataloging is not an exercise in vindictiveness or petty grievance collecting. It is a vital, life-saving tool for self-preservation. It provides an objective record that cuts cleanly through the dangerous personality's inevitable attempts to rewrite history and cast themselves as the victim. When the resolve to maintain safe boundaries begins to waver under the intense pressure of false apologies or societal guilt, returning to this stark, written inventory of transgressions heavily reinforces the absolute necessity of permanent distance. Furthermore, in severe situations that may ultimately require legal intervention, restraining orders, or the involvement of law enforcement, a meticulous, chronological record of threatening or exploitative behavior becomes an indispensable asset. It transforms vague feelings of dread and confusion into a concrete, undeniable, and actionable pattern of danger. The ultimate objective of recognizing and actively defending against these personalities is not to live in a perpetual state of paralyzing fear, but rather to cultivate a profound, liberating awareness. The journey forward involves reclaiming absolute sovereignty over one's own life, establishing a personal environment where safety, honesty, and mutual respect are non-negotiable prerequisites for any relationship. It requires setting rigidly defined boundaries and ruthlessly enforcing them, fully understanding that a dangerous personality will inevitably test and attempt to shatter these limits at every opportunity. As this defensive awareness takes permanent root, the capacity to instantly identify and expertly deflect toxic individuals becomes an intuitive, almost effortless reflex. This acquired wisdom acts as an invisible, impenetrable shield, dramatically reducing the likelihood of any future victimization. While the deep scars left by past encounters with these individuals may permanently endure, they serve as powerful, undeniable reminders of one's own formidable resilience. Moving forward means committing to an educated, lifelong vigilance, refusing to ever again be drawn into the chaotic, consuming orbits of those who lack conscience or empathy, and rightfully prioritizing one's own psychological, emotional, and physical well-being above all other considerations. Armed with this hard-won knowledge, individuals can boldly navigate the world with renewed confidence, fully equipped to protect themselves and their loved ones from the destructive forces that hide in plain sight.